What's up, y'all? It's Shuffle. In today's video is going to go over some changes the Darkest Dungeon 2 needs, at least in my opinion, and some of the opinions in my community. So before we get started, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, leave your thoughts down below in the comments, make sure to check out the description box for all the cool links, like Discord, Twitter, Twitch, Patreon, and the Epic Games Store code, all that awesome stuff. As far as changes, I wanted to keep it to like 5, but some of these are going to be in depth and some of them are not, so we actually have 13. The first change that DD2 needs is you need to lose faster. Right now, the game tries to make you lose by having your relationship spiral out of control, and then stress becomes a huge issue, and then you sit there and you give each other weak tokens and daze and blind and all that because your relationships are horrible, and then you melt down to like 2 hit points or whatever it is, and the enemy tries to kill you from there, and it just takes too long. It takes too long to die that way. In Darkest Dungeon 1, there were enemies like Swineskiver in the Warrens, which could kill your team in like 3 turns if you left it up. So that doesn't really happen as much in DD2 yet. Again, this is early access, so I understand they will add stronger enemies and all that at some point. But right now, it really feels like the game just tries to kill you through stress, and that's it. Here is an example of that. So there is a notorious road fight, which includes 2 ghoul enemies. Ghouls take a long time to kill, they have dodge, they can stun you, and all that, just very annoying stuff. They can give you diseases. Really annoying. So with ghoul, it doesn't really pose a huge threat to your HP total. What ghoul does is it kills you in about 30 minutes. So the fight will last like 6, 7, 8, 9 turns, whatever's happening. And in the span of that fight, even if it's just 1 ghoul, sometimes if it's 2, it's even worse. You'll have ghoul hit Howl, which can lower your torch by 10 every time it does it. Even if it misses, it just happens. And so ghoul can sit there and just spam a bunch of torch lowering and give you disease, or it can stun you and give you a bunch of stress and do a little bit of damage with rend. And so ghoul just takes forever as a fight normally. And then on top of that, since ghoul can take off, 10 to 40 of your torch, depending on how unlucky you are when you're fighting it, it's not that ghoul itself will kill you, it's the fact that it makes Shambler more common, and then also you have a higher chance of getting the ambush from the cultists once you hit 0 torch. So yes, it may feel like ghoul isn't really doing anything to you besides being annoying, but ghoul is actually one of the enemies that can kill you pretty reliably, especially if you get it in the first biome. It takes a while to do it. And I wish that wasn't the case. There's a lot of these cases where it just takes you a long time to die, and I'd rather some enemies just try and kill you quickly. The next change the game needs is a type of scaling. So right now, the hardest thing you can do in the game is usually in biome 1. So the first region you go to after the valley is usually your toughest, and if you try and fight the boss there in the lair, that's even tougher. Right now, the game doesn't really incentivize you to take those risks. It doesn't incentivize you to take those fights. It doesn't incentivize you to try and do that for trinkets or mastery or whatever. You're much better off just trying to get a couple mastery points from like hero shrines and then maybe, whatever random fight you happen to walk into, and then do it that way. Since mastery is the best source of power, it means that your second and third regions are always going to be easier than your first. They just are. So until some scaling system where it increases the monster's stats gets introduced, then the first region is always going to be the hardest. Another thing I'd like them to add, which I'm sure they will at some point, maybe not in early access, but at some point, is some kind of heat or ascension style system where you can just have these incremental challenges that make the game harder. Number 3, the stun resist buff needs to come back. This was in the first game. So whenever you or an enemy recovered from stun, you got a stun resist bonus for the next turn, so this way enemies couldn't stun lock you. This wasn't an issue at first in the game because stuns for the player were very difficult to do, but there are certain enemies, I'm not going to tell you exactly which ones, there are certain enemies though that can stun you very easily, and they'll stun you repeatedly, and they can even stun lock you, and that isn't fun. Another change the game needs is the 5-round fight structure. Maybe not removal of the 5-round fights. I understand why they're there for the road fights, but they really need to change what enemies can appear in the 5-round fights because some are just straight up unwinnable. Every single zone has a very, very difficult, almost unwinnable road fight mash for biome 1. In the Tangle, it's the double foot soldier with the bishop and the drummer. That fight is very hard to win in 5 turns. In the Fetter, it's any combo that has a dinner cart because that thing can heal for half its HP. It has 50 life already before any other modifiers. That's ridiculous. And then in the Sprawl, a lot of the enemies can heal, surprisingly. So they can like ignite themselves and get HP. The Emulatist and the Shaman, I believe, can heal them. And then some of them can give themselves dodge. So it's really just not easy to get through some of these fights. And in the first biome, where you have the lowest power you're going to have in the entire game, some of these are just very difficult to win. This is not even considering the fact that some of the matches can just be like, the woodcutting giant dude and then the ghoul. Number 5, there needs to be more incentive to take fights. there really isn't much reason to take them, especially in the first biome where you are going to be the weakest. Couple that with the fact that most of the boss trinkets aren't that strong. There's only a couple of them that are like, yeah, I want that. But a lot of them aren't, you know, stellar or standout or whatever. So outside of trying to get like the couple mastery points, which are probably the best reason to take a lair fight, there's no incentive to do so. So that should change. Otherwise, right now, what Red Hook is doing, if you haven't seen the patch preview, they haven't released the official patch notes as of the recording of this video. They are going to make it so you have to kill a boss and put it on your cart. So you have to have the trophy of the boss in order to finish the game. Originally, they said they wanted bosses to be optional, that you can go to just for power, which is, I thought, you know, a decent idea. And it seems like they're starting to walk that back. So I'd rather not be forced to take a boss. I mean, you know, I take bosses in my runs anyway, but it'd be nice if you weren't forced to take them and there's just a more creative solution, but I understand. Speaking of mastery, I believe there should be some kind of pity timer on mastery gain. The reason is right now they've lowered the chance to get mastery from road fights down to like 12% or something like that, so it's pretty low. And getting them from the nodes themselves is only a 50-50 chance. So right now your best sources of mastery are lair bosses and hero shrines. But I have personally had too many runs where I go through the first biome and my team isn't strong enough to take a boss, so I try and take a lot of road fights and node fights. So it's like I'll take, you know, 6 of those over the entire run, and I get like 1 mastery point by the time I get to the end. And it's like, I don't want to have to fight Deacon just so I can get another point, but I have to. And mastery is your most consistent and best source of powering up. So the fact that you don't get them guaranteed, or like it's, you know, it's always like a coin flip outside of certain situations to get them, I don't like that. If you're taking the risk of taking a lot of fights, you should eventually get like 2 or 3 mastery by the end of the run, or I should say the region. The other side of that point is when the scaling system gets introduced, if they ever make one, then the power curve of mastery might change a bit. So I really think that starting us off with 3 mastery points would be very nice, because as it stands now, you get 1 mastery point in the valley, and you just put that into like your stress heal, you know, because that's usually your most beneficial skill, instead of being able to get a lot of strategies off the ground early. The way it works now, since you can't get more than 1 mastery point until the second in after the valley, a lot of strategies take, no joke, like 90 minutes to get going, and that isn't that fun. If I have a team idea, I want to be able to start using it right out of the gate after the valley instead of having to wait till I clear a region in order to do it. The next change the game needs is relationships and stress gains. It's very hard to quantify what they need to change for relationships just because it's an ongoing process that's getting tweaked. There's a lot of numbers we don't know on how it works, but everyone has like complaints about it, and I understand. So relationships do need to undergo some more tweaks just to make them feel smoother and more enjoyable, or less destructive when they start going wrong, because it's pretty easy to let them slip out of control. But my bigger issue with this is stress gain. Since we are now stuck with a 10-point stress system instead of 100, there are a lot of instances that happen in the first game that are way stronger in the second game just because of that scale of 10 instead of 100. The most notable being traveling stress, because in the first game when you're walking down the hallway at, you know, normal torch levels, you get like 3 stress while walking through the hallway. That's not too much. That's 0.3 on the scale of what we have now. Meanwhile, in Darkest Dungeon 2, when you're traveling down the road, you get 1 stress. That's 10% of your bar. That's quite a lot, especially considering enemies hit you for 1 or 2 stress and then you're just getting 1 stress while going down the road. It can add up very quickly and you can't do much about it until you get into a fight. When you couple this with the fact that we're stuck with the 4 stress threshold, like all the stress healing moves work at 5 now, except for Laudanum. So if you're at 5, you can go down to like 4 or 3 or 2, depending on what the skill is. It's very hard to keep control of stress now. The game really wants you to be at, it feels like anyway, it wants you to be between like 60 and 40 torch and at 4 stress. The reason it wants you at 4 stress is because 4 stress is when your team starts to yell at each other and cause bad relationships. So I think the biggest change in the recent update back in November is once they changed the stress threshold for healing, it really exposed how punishing the stress gain is in this game, because we don't have ways to mitigate it as easily. So it feels like we get stress faster than we did in Darkest Dungeon 1, and then we have less tools to deal with it in Darkest Dungeon 2. The next change, can we please get some more debuff interaction? Right now, all the debuff resist trinkets are actually weaker than elemental resist trinkets, or like damage over time resist, whatever you want to call it. And stun and stuff like that too, now that I think about it. Actually, I think every single debuff trinket in terms of resist is like half of what its counterpart would be for any other resist, except for death blow. Since debuff is such a powerful stat in this game for both the player and monsters, having more ways to interact with it or mitigate it would be very nice. Because right now, if you don't resist something or use some combat item or something like that to make your tokens just go away, at least the ones you don't want, the only other thing we have that interacts with debuff tokens is indiscriminate science. The reason indiscriminate science is so good, I mean, yeah, you can heal like half or 70% of your HP with it, which is busted and will probably get changed at some point. It's the fact that it just takes off all the negative tokens. So if someone's sitting there stacking 2 blind and 2 weak on you, or like a blind and a vulnerable, you can just get rid of it. This was an issue in the first game where no one had an actual like debuff cure except for medicinal herbs. So it would be nice if this time around we had a skill of some kind that could consistently get rid of certain debuffs. Oh, and the other part of that is please give us some kind of thing like debuff amulet in the first game that increases debuff chance. Please and thank you. Number 9, there is too much trinket bloat in this game, which means there are too many trinkets that do pretty much the same stuff, like the resist trinkets just scale up, and crit trinkets and stuff like that scale up by a couple % each time, and it would be nice if they were consolidated. Trinkets themselves could go through some other changes themselves, like getting bigger power spikes for bigger drawbacks, just to make them more akin to Dark Ascension 1, because right now most trinkets are just pure value. What I was hoping with the new trinket system is that you would find trinkets that would augment your playstyle, and you go, okay, I don't want to use this move, but now I will. Just something wild. Like, I know we're still in early access, but it'd be cool if it'd be like using Solemnity with Leper, for instance, get like 1 block token. Just stuff like that, you know? Number 10, please add more nodes and Curio. Nodes kind of feel like a substitute for Curio from the first game, but it would be nice if Curio made a return in some fashion. And since we're looking at the new patch coming up with the preview here, we are going to get more nodes over time just by looking at the fact we're getting Oasis. So I think this is overall a good thing, but please keep adding them. Number 11, please add more player agency to unlockables. What I mean by that is when you're leveling your profile, instead of like gating Leper behind level 9 or 12 or whatever it was, just give someone every like 3 levels, give them a character unlock, and they can just pick the character they want. The reason I say this is because as a content creator for Darkest Dungeon, I watch other people stream and play the game themselves. And one of the most common things I heard on launch day was the fact that Leper was a fan favorite character, and a lot of people wanted to play Leper, and they couldn't play him after, you know, like a couple hours of playing. Instead, he was kind of locked behind, no joke, like 12 to 15 hours of playtime at that point. So letting players choose what heroes they get to unlock, what skills they get to unlock from hero shrines, or what even trinkets and stuff they unlock when they level up, that's a bit harder to implement, I understand. Some of that in some capacity would be pretty cool, and I think it would be appreciated. Speaking of unlocks, one of the other changes I've read a lot in my comments is people want a bigger sense of progression. I personally don't know how to qualify that or quantify it. It's not something I thought about too much, but it made sense, and I'm only bringing it up because it appears so much in my comments. The final thing is just a statement. It's more of a general thing that I read, and I thought it made a lot of sense. The statement being that the game can feel very consistent because you can take the same team each time. Between that and Hospitals and Mastery, you can just enact the same strategy every time you play, where the fun and strength of a roguelike is when you're playing it, you adapt to what you're given. But right now, Darkest Dungeon 2 has too many ways to, instead of you adapting to what's happening to you, you can circumvent it and still bend the game to what you're trying to do. This is a pretty tough line to walk because there are some things that need to be possible, like removing quirks, because honestly, who wants to have punch drunk the entire time? Or who wants to be stuck with sepsis on their Leper, for instance? So you still need ways to mitigate these things, but right now it feels like too easy to do these things, so I'm not really sure what that change would look like. Really, the only thing that changes between your runs are some of the modifiers on the regions you're going to, and trinkets. I do think this might be something that can be fixed, if you want to use that word, or at least changed as time goes on and more content gets added. Alright y'all, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you're thinking down below in the comments, what you agree with, disagree with, or what other input you have. Y'all have been having some really cool ideas out there, so I'd like to read them. And as for videos coming up, I'm going to start working on some Ruined King stuff alongside the Darkest Dungeon 2 stuff. I'm going to start streaming DD1 again here in a week or two. I'm not quite sure when. And when the patch notes come out for DD2, I will make a video on that. Otherwise, stay safe and enjoy your holidays. I will be scarce for the next few days as I'm doing stuff myself. And other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.